Welcome back, everyone. Today I started playing in the knockout phase of the Champions Chess Tour in the Airthings Masters event. Now, as you guys know, I did a recap the other day on my qualification process where I won that epic Armageddon game against Anil Dubov. Now, I did also say I'd be playing against Alireza Firouzja, but as it turns out, Chess.com made a slight mistake with the pairings and the seedings, and I ended up playing against Gukesh from India instead. So let's jump right into the match. So the situation is quite straightforward. We play 4-game match. If it's tied after 4 games, you go to Armageddon. Matches are 15 minutes with a 2-second increment for every single move. As I was a lower rated seed, I started out with black in game 1. So the first game starts with d4. We get knight to f6 being played here, and now I play the move c4, e6, and Gukesh plays knight c3. Now, normally he plays knight f3 here, so I was a little bit surprised by this Nimzo Indian choice. Nonetheless, I play bishop b4, e3, castles, a3, takes, all very standard theory so far. c5, we get bishop to d3, knight to c6 is played, knight to e2, I go b6, he plays this move e4, and now I go knight to e8. Again, all standard theory, and now he comes up with this very interesting move, h4. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this move is a novelty. It perhaps has been played in correspondence, but it's not a move that I was aware of. So during the game, I was definitely surprised by this move. That being said, if you guys watched a recent video where I played against Alireza Firouzja, I did talk about the structure and how when black castles the king to the king side, white can try to attack on the king side. So Gukesh plays h4 here, of course, very computerish move, very aggressive, and the reason I think is quite simple. White can go bishop g5, the pawn supports the bishop, and you attack the queen. White can also play h5 and h6. White can also go f4, and maybe if black plays h6, perhaps there's even something really bold like g4 and g5 here. So it's a move that's very multi-purpose. So here I play the move pawn to e5. Gukesh now plays the move pawn to h5 in this position, and I play this move d6. Now, the reasoning behind e5 was quite simple. I thought that when you look at this light square bishop, it looks very aggressive. For example, say I just play a really silly move like a5. I'm very worried that in the long term, white will go e5, opening up the scope for the bishop on d3 here. And if this diagonal opens, I don't really have a way to get rid of this bishop. I can't go bishop a6 and trade because the pawn's in the way, and it's just a very, very powerful piece. So I decided to play this move e5 here with the intention of closing down this diagonal. White can no longer push the pawn, and now the light square bishop looks like a big pawn sitting behind the pawns on e4 and c4. Now, amazingly, this move is apparently a blunder. Now, on the chess.com engine, it's showing zeros, but what I was told after the match when I spoke to my trainer, Chris Littlejohn, is that apparently after this move d5, white is, for all intensive purposes, after knight a5, knight g3, winning here. Now, again, the chess.com engine, it's not a supercomputer. It's not getting the same depth as the really strong engines would, but I was told that apparently for all effective purposes this position is winning for white if you let the depth get really deep. Nonetheless, Gukesh plays h5, which as a human makes a lot of sense. You've already played this move h4, so if you've played h4 here, for example, why do you want to go d5 and close the center? It just doesn't look right, because now the only pawn break you have is f4. Also, by playing h5, you can maybe castle later. You cannot castle here because now you would hang the pawn on h4. So it's just a move that makes a lot of sense when you're trying to play on the themes. But now I go d6 here. Gukesh plays h6. I go g6, of course. I do not want to open up this h file here. So after g6, Gukesh plays bishop to e3 developing, but now I go knight a5, and already at this point in the game, I was feeling very, very comfortable because I have ideas like bishop a6 to go after the pawn on c4. I don't really see white's big threat here. White can try to play something like f4, but even after f4, I can go knight f6 and jump back to g4 with the knight. So already here, I felt like Gukesh had made a mistake. Now, in my mind, however, I knew that probably what I had done was not correct because this h4 move was a new move, but for computers, the ideas are so simple, but for us humans, we try to look at things much more logically, and this concept with d5 was not a human move at all. So knight g3 is played by Gukesh. I go bishop a6, going after this pawn on c4 here with the bishop and the knight. Plays this move queen to e2, and now I decide to take on d4 and play this move knight b3. Initially, I thought maybe I should trade on d4 twice and go knight b3, forking the bishop and the rook, but I wasn't really sure what was going on here after bishop b2, knight takes a1, and bishop takes a1. I suspected that for a computer, this would be completely winning, but it looks quite scary with this open diagonal here. White has the 2 bishops. Center is kind of closed. I don't really have any pawn breaks with either d5 or f5, and it just felt to me like this could turn to some kind of alpha 0 position where it's actually long-term just winning for white. So instead I play knight b3, which attacks both the pawn and the rook. Gukesh has to move the rook, and now I take on d4. Gukesh captures, and he goes queen to b2. At this moment in time, black is temporarily up a pawn here, and white can't really attack easily. If you go like e5, for example, I can simply play a move like queen g5, takes, knight d6, followed by rook e8, and there's simply no attack. If white ever castles, he even loses the pawn on h6. So it's already very, very critical for white. So here, Gukesh plays the move queen to b2. Now I play the move rook to c8. He takes the pawn, and I go queen f6. And already here, I felt really, really good, because now I knew there was no danger. The position is really simplified. White has no attack, limited minor pieces on the board, and at this point, I think that I'm already better, and I started to think around here that I was probably going to actually win this game, which would be a huge boost in the first game. So he goes knight to e2. We trade the queens. I play knight f6 here. Now, I'd love to take on c4, but after rook c1, white pins the tail on the donkey here, and I'm still probably better after b5, but white can go f3 and king d2, and I think white has very good chances to save the game. So instead I play knight f6 first here, which connects the two rooks on the back rank. Goes king to d2 here. Now white could try to play rook c1, but after rook to c1 there are a couple options. The line that I was intending to play was this move knight takes e4, because after bishop takes e4 I can go rook e8 here, and after white plays f3 to protect the bishop, I now have this very nasty move pawn to d5 here. White cannot move the bishop because then you would lose your king, and white also cannot take with the pawn because then you would lose both of the rooks on the back rank. So in this position, Gukesh plays the move king to d2. Now I take the pawn on c4. He goes pawn to f3, and at this point it's really simplified. Black is up a pawn here in the center. White's center, however, is very solid, and this pawn on h6 in the long term could become a big strength because there are ideas with back rank checkmates. The king has no space going forward. On the other hand, it can also become a weakness as well if the rooks come off the board. So after f3, I play this move d5, trying to get rid of this weak pawn in the center, trade off a weak pawn for the strong central pawn on e4. He goes e5, of course. I trade, and now I go knight to d7, attacking the pawn on e5. White cannot go e6 because I go knight c5, forking the king and the pawn. And once I win the pawn on e6, you can do the counting. I simply have 2 extra pawns, and the rest should be very, very simple. So instead he goes f4, and now I play this move rook c4. Now for those of you who are watching the live broadcast of this game, you probably noticed that after I played rook c4, probably about 10 seconds later, I actually had this look like I started shaking my head, or I had this confused look, and the reason was because as soon as I played rook c4, I realized that I could have played this f6 move instead, which would have forced white to sort of give up this big I don't want to say big center, but white can't keep the center intact. So if white goes e6, I have knight c5 check, and after king d2, I can even go knight e4, infiltrate with the rook here, and this is a huge disaster for white. Additionally, if white tries to go like king e2, for example, I can just simply play rook f8 and win the pawn on e6 next move, because after f5 I will take the pawn on f5. So I sort of actually was annoyed at myself because I thought that I had missed a chance to sort of simplify position and win on the spot. And the reason is because if white can somehow keep the pawns here and I can't play f6 to break the chain, the pawns are very, very well placed and they prevent me from really creating activity, and there's only one open file here. So in this position, Gukesh goes rook hc1, I play rook c8, and now he makes a huge blunder with knight e2, and I was very, very happy to see this move because now I can actually do what I should have done a few moves ago by playing this move f6, which ruins white's structure. White cannot go e6 because now I have knight c5 winning the pawn on the spot, and once white takes on f6, now it's a 3-on-2 on the king's side, but white has no space, and my pawn on d5 is actually very, very well placed. I can move with the knight to e4, it guards the rook on c4, I control the open file, and it's really, really good. So after e takes f6, I go king f7. Gukesh trades the rooks on c4, plays king to e3, and now I play this move knight c5. Now the reasoning behind this move is quite simple. I wanted to go rook a4 here, but after rook to b3, knight c5, rook to c3, king takes f6, knight d4, I didn't really see the way forward. Now of course with a computer you instantly realize that g5 with the idea of going after this pawn on h6 wins, but I didn't see that at the time, and so I thought that it was simpler to play knight c5 first, because my assumption was now I stop rook to b3, and after rook to d1, rook a4, I'm winning the pawn on a3, I'm winning the pawn on f6, and with 2 connected pawns on the queen side, it's got to be winning, right? Surely it's got to be winning. Not so fast. We get rook takes d5, rook takes a3, he goes king d4, and now I make this check on d3. Initially, I wanted to take this pawn on f6, but after white goes knight c3 here, I wasn't 100% sure where the clear win was, because the problem is I can't go rook a4, I can't swing on this third rank, so the knight and the king are in the way, and white still is g4, g5 here, and after a move like rook a1, rook e5, now white's getting knight d5 with ideas like rook e7, and it really doesn't actually feel clear-cut at all. So what I told myself after a bit of think was, you know what, just trade the towers here. Once the rooks are off the board and we're playing a game of knights, surely this must be winning with 2 connected, and more importantly with a pass outside a pawn. So Gukesh goes g4 here, and now I played a5. In retrospect, I do think I should have played this move g5 here, because after white goes f5 and I go a5, knight c3, a4, I keep both of these pawns alive on the king side, and after white plays, let's just say king d4, I just go a3. If knight d5, king f7, king c3, for example, I can go b5, followed by knight e4 and knight f6, and it should be really, really straightforward to win. Now, the reason that I wish I'd done this is because after I go a5 first, knight d4, I again forgot to play g5 and I played a4, which now allows white to go g5. He connects a chain of pawns. My king actually has no way to progress forward, so I have to go backwards with king f7, and now he goes knight b5. Now, for a split second here, I actually thought that maybe I'd messed it up and it was going to be a draw, but luckily I kept my wits about me and I found a very nice tactic here. Now, the problem is that I can't really advance the a pawn. I can't advance the b pawn because the knight's in the way, so it stops the a pawn and it blockades the b pawn, and I can't really do anything special with my knight here to help push the a pawn up the board. Luckily, after a bit of a think, I kept my wits about me and I played knight e6 here. Goes king e5 to guard the pawn on f4, and now this very nasty move, knight c7, sacrificing the knight. And if white takes the knight, I go a3. The pawn is free. We're going to get a queen at the end of the board. The rest will be very simple, and white can no longer prevent me from pushing the pawns because the knight also is going to support the pawn push to b5. And after this move, the rest of the game is without doubt. So he continues with knight c3. I go a3 here. Goes f5. If white were to play king d4, for example, I can go knight b5 check again. If white takes, a2 wins. If white goes king c4, I can simply trade b5, king b3, and b4. 2 pawns are protected, and I will run the king up. If white ever eats the pawn on b4, I get a queen again. And if king a2, I just go king e6, f5, and then I eat all 3 of these pawns in succession, and I will be winning immediately. So he goes f5 here. I trade the pawns, and now I go b5. Plays knight a2, I go knight to a6 here, supporting the pawn push to b4 and b3. He tries knight c1, I go b4, king e5, and now after knight c5, Gukesh resigns in view of the fact that after he moves the king, say d5, I go b3, king takes knight, b2, and I'm getting a queen on the b1 or c1 squares, and I will just mop up the rest. So game 1, I win with the black pieces. Huge, huge win in general terms for the match potential. It's very good when you start with black and you win, because that means you're up by 1 and you have 2 whites and 1 black, so the odds are really, really high. Very, very good first one, so let's move on to the second game. Second game, I'm playing with the white pieces. I play knight to f3 here, and now we get d5, I go g3, c6, bishop g2, bishop g4. Opening is pretty standard. I play h3. Now, it's worth noting Gukesh normally doesn't play this, but I was very happy to see this because what black really should do here is take on f3. But after bishop takes f3, followed by d3, knight d2, and castles, it's going to turn to a very slow game where white has the bishop pair. Black should be completely fine with the big black center here after e5, but white should never be in any danger of losing. And with the lead of 1-0, I was feeling very, very good about this. So after h3 goes bishop h5. Now I play d3. Plays this move knight to f6 here, and now I play this move knight b to d2. So after knight to b to d2 is played, he goes knight b d7, and now I go g4, bishop g6, and knight h4 with the idea of trading this knight for the light square bishop. And after that, again, I'm going to have the double op combo with the 2 bishops, and I probably play this position, I'm going to guess, at least probably 200 times in Blitz on the internet. So I felt really, really good about all of this. So he goes e5 here, I play e3, bishop to d6, I play b3, trying to create the double fianchetto with the 2 bishops attacking towards the center. Goes a5, I play a3 here, not bishop to b2 by the way, because then black can go a4 and a3, and I'm feeling a little bit cramped. So after a5, I play a3, he goes knight to f8, now I play bishop to b2 here, knight e6, queen to e2. Now what I'm doing here is I'm finishing all of my development, but I'm also keeping my options open to where I can castle the king either to the queen side or to the king side. So we get queen c7. I play this move c4, trying to ask him what he's doing with the pawn structure. And here Gukesh makes a mistake in my opinion. He decides to castle. Now, mind you, Gukesh had already lost the first game, so he's definitely back on his heels. Losing with white in game 1 was not what he was expecting. So he's probably back on his heels, and he didn't react very well. Additionally, he doesn't normally play this setup with bishop g4, h5, g6. So this also helped. All of these things contributed to some of the decisions he made. So he decides to castle here. Now what he should have played is he should have played d4, because if I ever take with a pawn, then he gets this knight jump to f4, and it's a complete disaster for white. Now, he didn't do it because probably he was also worried that I get the e4 square, but black should be completely fine here. So instead, he castles. I trade on g6. He takes with the h-pawn, and now I go h4 here. Now, again, for a computer, this position should be fine, and frankly, I think if the match situation was different, Gukesh probably would have reacted better. But I think the problem is at this point, Gukesh had lost the first game. We were both moving pretty quickly because this is something I've played many times in Blitz. And his reactions, he wanted to keep the pace and he didn't want to slow down. I don't know if it was tilt or what it was, but definitely his reactions were not right. So here he goes rook f e8. Now I play this move g5 here. He goes knight f4. I go queen f1. And here Gukesh misses his chance. At this point, Gukesh really needed to realize that the best he can do here is go for broke, because the problem is if he trades for the bishop here, like in the game, and plays knight h5, the position is probably okay. I'll say it's okay for black. I won't say it's like it's great. It's probably okay, but there's zero risk for white. So if Gukesh had realized there's zero risk and there's a good chance that he could end up losing here, I think he would have played this move e4, which incidentally enough is apparently the best move, shockingly. Now, I did see this move during the game. I didn't really consider it that scary for a couple of reasons. First of all, I wasn't 100% sure what was going on if I take and play king d1. I assumed that after rook to e2 with bishop f4, I was probably in some trouble here, but I wasn't so sure. But additionally, I thought that I could also just trade on e4, and after takes, knight takes e4, I just assumed with pieces coming off the board and being able to play h5 and use this h5, it should be fine. Although apparently after bishop to e5, black is quite a bit better. So, interesting. At any rate, Gukesh took very quickly, and now after taking on g2, the rest of the game is going to be a long, slow, painful game of suffering. So I play queen takes knight, goes knight h5, I trade on d5, and here I play this move rook to c1. Initially, I thought I could take the pawn on d5, but after queen to c2, I have some issues here. If I play a move like bishop to c1, for example, black can play knight to f4 here, and after takes, if I go knight e4, I believe he had, was it queen c3 or was it bishop, maybe it was bishop e5, but both of these moves look very, very scary. My rook in the corner is trapped, and so I don't really want to go there. I mean, I can maybe play king f1 here, but still, after a move like bishop e5 again, or even rook a d8, for example, it feels really, really scary. Even though I'm up a piece, these three pieces are very misplaced. So after a bit of a think, I decided to play rook c1, and the reasoning was quite straightforward. After queen e7, I could take the pawn. And the first thing that I looked at was bishop takes a3, takes, and queen c5, which I played in the game, and I thought I was good. So that's the first thing I looked at. But then I also started thinking, well, wait, if I take, what if he doesn't take? What if he plays something like rook a d8? But then I saw I could just take on a5. I can put this knight on e4. My king is actually very safe because he can never play knight f4 due to takes, and knight e4. Pawn guards the knight. There are no f5 pawn pushes, and the rest should be very basic. So I still think that here Gukesh probably should have played rook e d8 to hope for something, because after bishop a3, trade and queen c5, the queens are most likely coming off the board here, and the big problem for black is that he's playing without a knight. The horsey on the edge of the board, as we like to say, the knight is dim. The knight is very dim here. There are no squares for the knight to go to. He can't go to g3, covered by the pawn, can't go to f4, covered by the pawn, can't go to f6, covered by the pawn, and because he has the double pawns, he can't go to g7 either. So this horsey is just simply dead on the rim. So he plays a4 here. I go king e2. He takes, I go rook b1, plays rook a4, I take, he takes, I take, and still I'm feeling very good here because the horsey is still trapped. There are still no squares available for the knight to go to, and if he ever has to play f6, I'm going to create castle mania with the doubled rooks on the 7th rank. So already here I was feeling amazing. I thought I was just going to win this game very smoothly, go up 2-0, and just coast to victory. But not so fast. So he plays rook g4, I go knight to e4 here, and after knight to e4 in this position, he plays f5, I take, and he takes with the pawn. Now, knight takes f6 looks okay on first glance, but it actually, I thought, lost on the spot to rook takes pawn, but maybe I'm crazy. I thought after takes, there was rook c7 check, king's under attack. Apparently, he can try knight d7, although after takes and knight f6 with the fork of the two rooks, this still should be very, very good for white. Maybe it's a draw somehow, but it looks like it should be losing long term. So he takes with the pawn. I create the doubled rooks on the 7th, castle mania, as Michel Carré, the famous YouTuber, would call it. He goes rook g1, and already here I knew this had to be winning. But the thing is how to win. The knight is very well placed on h5. It guards the g7 square. It also guards the pawn on f6, and the rook covers all the squares on the 8th rank. And in addition, I don't really have pawns that I can push up the board. This is like a pawn on the edge. I could push it. I can't really push in the center because then I open up the e file. f4, same thing. I mean, I'm just going to lose a pawn here. So what am I doing exactly? How do I convert it? So I thought that the only way to convert was somehow to use this knight, because this black knight, even though it's very defensive here and it guards some critical squares, it's not active. So surely I can activate my knight. So I play knight d6 here. He goes rook a8, and now I played a move that I actually regretted after I played it. I played this move knight to f7. The reasoning behind going knight f7 was very simple. I thought that after knight f7, I was going to go knight h6 and checkmate him. If he checks, I just go king f3. It's all very, very good. Let's just say check here. He has to go back, so if he plays like rook f1, I go check and mate on the back rank. And if he plays something like, I don't know, like, what does he do? Like king f8 even? Again, I can just go knight to h6 here. And the problem is I'm going to go rook f7, rook e7. One sample line, just to show you guys a cool mate, would be rook a1. I go check, king e8, check here. And then I can play knight g8 with the idea of rook f8 checkmate. Very unusual mating pattern, but it works. Unfortunately for me, I didn't miss the move, but I didn't realize it was playable, which is this move knight g7. Now again, knight g7 looks like an insane move. I have knight h6 check, I can take the pawn, knight should be able to go anywhere, but as I realized, it's not that simple, because if I check on h6 after king h7, I don't have a good square for the knight. If I can put the knight on g4, like let's just say this rook was magically let's just say this rook is magically on a1, I get knight g4, this is GG. I just win the knight or I win the pawn, game over. But with the rook on g1 here, if I go to g4 after takes, and king h6, black actually should draw this game because it's the same number of pawns and rooks. So it's very, very tricky here. Additionally, if I play the move that also looks very logical, knight takes e5, this actually runs into knight to e6 here, and I have to be extremely careful because if I play a move like rook e7, I actually get checkmated by rook a2 check, king f3, knight to g5, king f4, rook takes f2 check, knight f3, rook takes f3, and what on earth have I done to the position? So I had to be very careful here, and I was actually very upset with myself for allowing this, because suddenly it feels like black is back in the game. So I go rook c6 here, knight to f5 is played, and now I take the pawn on f6 here. Very, very important that I go for this. If the knight gets active and I don't win a pawn, like so let's just say the rook's on a 7th rank here, let me just set it up like this. I have nothing here. The knight is very active on f5. There always are check ideas with rook a2 and knight h4, and black should have no issues at all. So I had to be very careful. So I was very happy that I found rook c6, knight f5, and then I played rook takes f6. Now I played this move for one simple reason. I did not see a way for black to checkmate me, and I thought my king could run up to the center of the board, like check, knight h4, king e4, let's say check, and I thought I could just run my king up the board to like d5. I thought I could also play d4, and so when I didn't see a way for black to keep checking me and I could block the checks, I felt that it had to be okay. It is, after all, a free pawn. Nonetheless, after rook to a2, king f3, rook a4 is a very, very tricky defensive resource because black is threatening to go knight h4 and then checkmate on a2 because the king cannot run up to the 4th rank. And after rook a4, I would have had to find d4 takes, e4, king g7, and like rook b6. The game goes on. White is still better, but it probably is not actually winning with perfect play. Fortunately for me, Gukesh plays a move that looks obvious. He plays rook to f8, which pins the knight here. I can't move the knight to like h6 because then he captures the knight. I can't capture the pawn. I can't really move my rooks. But the problem is I have a simple tactic, which is I can play king f3 here, and black, or by simple tactic, I mean I have a simple tactic after black's only move here. In this position, when you look at it, black cannot really move this rook. If you move the rook, you lose the pawn on g6. You have no squares to move to on the g file, so you can't move the rook. You can't move the e pawn. You can't move the g-pawn because you lose your knight. You can't really move your rook either. So the only piece that you can move here is your king. But unfortunately, after king g7, I have a tactic with knight g5 check, king takes rook, knight to h7 check, forking the king and the rook. We get king to e6. I take, he goes king f6, and now I played a move that I was very unhappy with. In this position, I played this move rook b6 because I thought, you know what, if he goes to f7, I have knight d7, I win the pawn, g7, same thing. Goes to e7, I just take the pawn. Of course, that doesn't work. But as I realized as soon as I played rook b6 after king e7, if I play knight takes g6, black can actually take the knight because of the fork with knight h4, and now black should save the game. So I was very unhappy. Now, fortunately, if this had occurred, I still could have played knight e6 and the game goes on. Maybe I still win, but I was annoyed that I missed this tactic. At any rate, Gukesh plays king g7, and now after knight d7, black is going to lose his pawn on e5. I still have 3 connected pawns, and the result is never really in doubt. It continues with knight h4. I play king to e4, check, I take, he goes knight f3, king to e6, rook g2. Black has to try to win one of these pawns. I go rook to b2, and now he makes a check, king e5, and he goes knight h3, trying to win the pawn on f2. I cannot push it because then I would lose the rook on b2. So I go knight f6, he takes, I check, and he goes king to f8. It's worth noting that knight takes f2 would lose because I can just quietly sidestep with king e6 here, and the pin is too much for black to deal with. Or maybe not. Maybe I actually have to check first. At any rate, he plays rook takes f2 here. I go check. He goes king f8. Now, if he were to go to h6, there's a fork with knight g4. If he were to go to h8, I have rook h7, which is a classic Arabian checkmate. So he goes to f8. Now I push e4, knight f4, go d4, check, king e6, check, king d6, knight e2, I check, and now I start pushing again. He goes knight c3, and now I play this move knight c5 check, just guarding the pawn on e4, goes king h6, and now I play king e5 here with the very simple idea that I'm guarding the pawn on e4 with the knight, and now I can just start pushing p with d6, d7, rook b8, and rook b6, or other ideas, and just make a queen. So he goes g5, I play d6, rook d2, d7, g4. I play rook b6 here, and Gukesh resigns in view of the fact that I can build a bridge with rook to d6, blocking the rook from capturing the pawn. And after takes, knight guards the pawn on e4, and knight b5. Let's just say king to d5 is simplest, knight c7, king to e5. I'm going to get a queen with d8 next move, and there's nothing black can do. So, second game, I get a big win with white. So now I'm up 2-0. So we go into the third, and what would turn out to be the final game of the match. So Gukesh plays d4, knight f6, knight f3, I play e6, and now he plays bishop f4, the classic London system. So I play c5, e3, go d5 here, he plays knight d2, and now I play queen b6, rook b1, and bishop d7. Now this is not the best way to play the system, I'm well aware of that, but I could tell from the visual reactions of Gukesh and just the time usage of every move that he was already on tilt, and I had a feeling he would not react correctly, and right on cue he plays his move c3, which is a big mistake. What white should do here is play either bishop to e2 or c4. Now, to be fair, Gukesh was on tilt, and he also doesn't play the London system, so I think he just simply underestimated what my idea was, which is that after c3 I go bishop b5. Now you might think, well, how do you come up with such an idea at the board? The reasoning is very simple. There is another opening which can occur with a similar setup, which is e4, e6, d4, d5, e5, c5, c3. Now, this is the advanced French with queen b6, knight f3. Now, there are lines here where black goes bishop d7, bishop d3, and bishop b5, trying to exchange the light square bishops. So that was sort of the inspiration for coming up with this, and I felt really good after I got this in. He goes c4, I take, I trade, I go queen b4 check, the bishop's under attack, he has to block with the knight, and now I play his move c takes d4. Now, in retrospect, I was actually quite unhappy with myself for having done this, because I thought that if I had played knight e4 here, I would have actually been able to probably not save, but draw in the game much more simplistically, because after a3 is played, I can trade everything off on d2, I can take, and play knight c6, followed by castles, and I find it very hard to believe that white can be all that much better. So I was kind of annoyed at first when I took, because now if I go knight e4, white can play a3 because the bishop on f4 guards the knight on d2. So I play knight c6, Gukesh castles, I play rook to d8, goes a3, queen b6, and bishop to e3. Now, I don't know if I could have taken this pawn or not, but in a situation where I'm up 2-0 here, and I feel like my opponent's a little bit on tilt, you don't even want to go for the complications if you can help it. So I play queen c7, queen e2 is played, bishop d6, g3, and now I castle, rook c1, queen b8, and we sort of reached the starting middle game position here. Now, material is even, but white does have this isolated pawn on d4, but in return he has the two bishops. That being said, in a must-win game where black's position is very solid, it's going to be difficult to play. So Gukesh plays rook fd1, I go bishop e7 to attack the pawn on d4, and now we get this move knight to f3, I play knight d5, goes b4, I play bishop to f6, putting pressure on the pawn on d4 with the knight and the bishop. Gukesh plays bishop d3, now I go knight takes e3. Now, this is probably not the best move, but the reason that I play this was I considered match situation. Now, in this situation, I know that a draw is good enough. And the reason I did this is because after takes, and g6, even though white is probably a little bit better here, it's going to be very hard to play. You can't really push on the king side with h4 because g3 is weak. You can't push d5 because I take the pawn. You also can't push e4 because then you lose d4. So white can't really push these pawns in the center. It's opposite color bishops, and my king is very safe with these three pawns in front. So I thought it was a very, very good practical decision. Gukesh goes bishop e4, I play knight e7, he goes g4, and now I play this move rook c8. Now, probably I should not have done this. Probably I should have played a simpler move like knight to d5, or maybe even b6 for this matter, but I thought rook c8 was fine. Now he goes g5, bishop g7, and he has this queen b5 move. Now, as soon as he played this, I actually realized that I have to be a little bit careful here, because once I play b6 and queen d7, I don't really have the ideal setup. What I'd love here is to have some position like this, for example, where I can just put the knight on d5, and after takes, I can take with the rook or the pawn, and I'm completely fine. But in this exact position, I don't get that, because if I go knight d5 here, I simply lose a pawn on d5. So I play knight f5 instead, and the reasoning was very simple. After bishop takes and pawn takes, I do have the double pawns on f5 and f7, but white now has a weakness on e3, and the only way that I felt white can win this game is if he can use his passed pawn and get it all the way to the end of the board. And I also felt that white has to do this fast, because if white just dawdles and takes his merry time, eventually I'm going to be able to get a position like this, where my bishop is now really well placed on d6, target to h2. It stops white from pushing the pawn. It also stops knight e5, and black is just better. So it felt like this was a reasonable choice, because Gukesh has to go all in immediately, try to create something in the next couple of moves, or else I'm just going to end up being better. So I played bishop b2 here. Now I suspect this wasn't the best move, but I thought it simplifies the position, because after takes, if white trades the queens here, it looks scary on first glance with a pawn, but I can just slowly bring my king over towards the center. I play rook d8 first, not king e8, because then he has d7 with the fork, but I go rook d8 first, and after, white doesn't really have many good squares. The knight can't go to e5 or d4. If he goes to d4, I take the pawn. If he goes to e5, I take the knight on e5. And additionally, if he tries to bring the king closer, I just walk my king to d7. So let's just say we play some random moves, and eventually I win the pawn on d6. So white has to do something immediately, and I think Gukesh, realizing this, decided, you know what, it's a must-win situation. I'm not trading queens here. I'm going to take on a7. Now, at first glance, I thought this was a huge blunder. Anybody who watched the live broadcast would notice that I was shocked by this move, because I thought that I could go f4 here. But if I play this move f4, white can actually just take, and after queen g4, king f2, rook c8, it looks really scary on first glance. I have moves like rook c2 lurking, but after queen b6, it just isn't there. If I play rook to c2, for example, white goes rook d2, trade, takes, knight f3, white's king is very safe, knight covers all the critical squares here, and I simply can't do anything. White has a passed d-pawn. That would be GG's. So on first glance, I was like, wait, this is a blunder, but as I thought more, I was, wait a second, Gukesh actually knows what he's doing. So I played queen c2 instead. Gukesh goes rook d2 here. Now I played queen c2 because I realized that there's, again, white really only has this d-pawn. The king is very open, so white has to try to create play with the pawn. If white goes passive with a move like rook e1 here, I can even play something really silly like b5, fixing the pawns here, because now without the rook on the d file, all of these pawns in the center are going to become weak very quickly here, and that's why Gukesh goes rook d2. So I play queen e4 here, plays king f2, and now I go bishop to c1, attacking the rook and potentially the pawn on e3. Continues with rook e2. Now I found rook e8. He takes, and now I have this very nasty move f4 here. White cannot capture the pawn, because then you would lose the rook on e2, and if not, I'm probably going to get a wooden shield in the middle of the board here, which would be very powerful. So we get queen b5 being played by Gukesh, and here I decided to take with the pawn for a very simple reason. I knew bishop e3 was a move, but I realized that after takes, king g3 and bishop takes a3, the pawns are even here, and if white cannot keep these two pawns on the board, it's not even so much about winning, but there will be zero chance of white winning. So if it's a draw, that's fine, I don't care, but I have to eliminate the risk that I can play a one move blunder and lose the game. So Gukesh goes d6 here. I take the pawn. He plays queen to b6, and here I actually got very confused, because when I saw this move, I thought, wait, I can just play queen d3 and win. But shockingly, after queen takes b4 and queen takes e2 d7, white is winning here. If I check, there's king f4. King is very safe here. Knight covers the squares on h2 and h4. I have to move my rook. If I go to f8, he takes and makes a queen and wins the game. If I go to d8, he has queen e7. He's going to win the rook, and he's going to win the rook for the pawn and win the game. And if I play rook to a8, which is the other move that makes a lot of sense, white has this very nasty move, queen to a5 here, offering the queen up to be captured. But if I capture, white makes a queen, and then he wins the rook on a5, and again, it's GG. And if I don't take the queen, well, white's covering the square and attacking the rook, so it's a good old-fashioned right triangle. So I had to be a little bit careful here, but finally, after a bit of a think, I played this move, rook to f8. Now, the computer says rook to e6 would have been winning, because after check, king g7, if white pushes, there's bishop d6, which ends the game. But I don't need to win. And so I knew that at this point after queen b6, as long as I win this d6 pawn, I don't care if I give up either, whatever I do, I will never lose in a million years. So I play rook f8, he goes d7, and now I play queen to e7, stopping the pawn, but also still guarding the bishop on b4. Gukesh plays rook takes e3. I check on d6 here. I do not take the pawn, because then I would lose the bishop on b4. So I check, moves the king, I take on d7, and now with this pawn eliminated, black is up a pawn, and if this was a serious game, I probably would try hard to win, but there's no need since I'm ahead 2-0. So queen d4 is played. I play queen c6. goes queen e4, I trade, I go rook a8, and here I offered Gukesh a draw, which he accepts. Of course, black has an extra pawn I still can play on here, but there really is no need because at 2.5 half or 3-0, it makes no difference objectively, and the goal is to win the match. So with this draw, I win this match 2.5 half. I advance to the next round where I play somebody. I don't know who I play. I don't really care who I play, as you guys probably can tell. I'm not in Florida right now. I had to make an emergency trip out here to the West Coast once again. So I'm not going to talk about that, but it's you know, there are things that are a little bit more important than chess right now. So I will simply end by saying that I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. Make sure that you guys are enjoying life and you're happy. Enjoy the time you have, and I hope you enjoyed the recap. Make sure to hit the subscribe button below, and I'll be back with another recap tomorrow. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see everybody very soon. Bye.